and that'll be on 3D lighting and materials. So it'll kind of be like, take what you learned tonight. 1 week from now, we'll go more in depth on like 3D and whatnot. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and give it to Sajjaad and Tre Shell, and they're going to talk to you about lighting and stuff.
Thank you.
Also, just one quick announcement before we start. Myself and a couple other of the animation juniors are planning to do a stop motion short. So if anyone is interested in volunteering, please just come up to me and talk to me after the presentation and demo is done. That'd be super helpful, it'd be fun. But thank you.
Wait, can I do it?
With the,
Yeah, I want to help you with the short. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to be doing one as well, but it's for, no, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Yeah, be in the short. That'd be cool.
Okay.
Well, I guess up here was Sajjaad. Just be like, hey, did you hear about this artist? Do you have a moment in time to talk about a Lord and Savior named Sam Nelson?
Okay. Let's see. I think that's good.
Okay. Got everything set?
Okay. Yeah.
Is this still streaming? Or
Yeah,
do we need
we're
to start
recording.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
we're on. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
All right, thanks for joining, everyone. So we're going to go ahead and start by opening a quick document.
Let's open up this.
And we're going to get right into it.
There. And brushes.
Nice. Oh,
Yeah.
do you have all the examples in here too?
And
That's
windows.
really cool.
Oh, wait. Oh, yeah, I have some stuff that I still left on there. But
Perfect.
okay.
So pretty
I'm
much
still setting up
so,
the
yeah. Pretty much what he's just doing right now is kind of setting up the Photoshop document and everything, how he prefers his presets. Including brushes. He's probably going to go over the difference between brushes and brush tools as well. And sort of the process that he's going through for the setup that kind of like streamline the process. Nice.
I'm going to be annoying and probably talk to you for a second, but yeah, it's really good to do that.
Ask all the
program you're
questions.
working on. So like all that extra junk in Photoshop, like sometimes, I don't know about you guys, but it really bothers me seeing a whole bunch of things that I'm not going to touch. So just like drag them out and close out of them. Just get them out of the way. Only have the necessary tools you need. And you can always add them on again if you discover that you need them later. But I've noticed that it helps my workflow when that tool set is decluttered and set up the way that I like it. So now everyone knows Sajjaad's secrets.
Get an inside scoop on the setup.
Hang on.
Wow, look at those presets.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you have all the brushes and everything downloaded?
Yeah, hang on. Actually, I need to get the brushes, other brushes.
Should I talk a little bit about the brushes while you're setting it up?
I think it's fine right now. Okay, so I pretty much have everything set up.
Okay.
And
Make sure you talk a little louder too for the mic.
yeah. Okay, so real quick, I'm gonna talk about hang on, the brush setup that I use, and basically, I mean, you can get any custom brush that you like and stuff, whatever suits you the most. For the most part, the brushes that Photoshop has really suck, so you know, get custom brushes. But at the same time, instead of just using like basic, instead of just using textured brushes, there's a lot of really cool textured brushes that you can use. But I kind of categorize using these brushes into 3 ways. There's a lot of really cool textured brushes that you can use and stuff. The thing is about these brushes that they have really terrible control. So it's really hard to like clean up the edges that you want and stuff. So the first kind of brush that I would use is textured brushes. And so they're really great, nice texture and everything, but they're just really hard to control. The second kind is just block-in brushes. This is what I use for like 70% of the painting. It's just standard, circle brush. I also have a square brush over here. And here's a hexagon brush. These brushes, they don't really have any texture on at all, but they're really good and really easy to control. So you can make really precise shapes and stuff. Block those out, and whenever you're done, you can just use a mask layer on top, and then paint on top with whatever texture you want. And just use just a filbert here. And then you can use, the texture on top of your painting, and that's how a lot of concept art is done. I can show you some examples later of concept artists that would do that. And then, whenever you're done with that, if you want to carve out your painting, you just go to the layer beneath it, and you can just go and carve out with your something more precise about what you want. So if you're doing a rock or something, you can carve in more details later on, and you have a lot more control. Let's delete those. What the heck is this here? Okay. So basically, I've started out with already have a few stuff blocked in here, a few objects that I've blocked in. So I'm going to go through basic laws of light and how they react in the scene. This stuff is going to be fairly simple at first, and they, it'll seem fairly obvious, and they layer on top of each other. So start out with a circle. Okay. So the first law of light is it's pretty simple. It's let's get a brush that I have.
So pretty much what he has currently is a couple preloaded clipping masks of shapes that we're going to go over. And everything is kind of based around really basic shapes, and we'll go over this a little later as well. But we're going to go over just one point landing at first, and setting up and how that it affects the shape as well. I believe the primary shapes that we're going to be talking about is a sphere, a cylinder, and a cube as well. Mm-hmm. And sort of how...
Yeah, just for the purpose of simplicity, every object that you'd be painting could be simplified to either cubes, cylinders, or spheres. So for the purpose of this, I'm just going to use that. But so obvious, first rule of light is anything closest to your light source will get the most light, and anything at the angle, anything facing the light the most will get the most light. So for example, you have your light source over here. You have say you have a landscape or something like that. You have some angled land. Anything directly facing this light source will get the most light. Anything closest to it. So if you have this one's really close and facing up, so this is probably going to be the brightest here. You get hot spots here. So this is where your highlights would be on all of this. And that's, fairly obvious. And then over here it's going to get slightly less light, and then in here where there's not much light is going to reach, that's going to be the darkest. So that's the first rule. And then here. Is that it? Yes, not that. So just go to standard airbrush. So that's the first law of light. Let's say if you imagine this is like a giant vacuum here. Like this. Where is that? Put that up.
This also sort of explains why, the corners, and we'll go over a couple of different kinds of lighting as well.
Okay.
Or show up really bright in comparison to sort of the smoothness of a sphere as well.
So that's first rule of light. It's fairly simple. Planes. Is that? Okay. And since both of these would be facing the sunlight here, so we're going to use this as our sunlight also. All these layers. Okay. So since they're facing let's imagine this is like a sun, an equal sunlight, and all the lights facing this direction. Right. So it's going to be brightest around here, and it's not going to be as bright here. So let's do that. Circle. Okay, and that's going to be fairly obvious. It's going to be the brightest. Second rule of light is anything in front of another object is going to block the light there. So here we go. This one. All right. So I have another object, another plane here. So this is a vacuum of space. It's the only light source here, and there's no other light source around. So that's how your scene would generally look like. Second rule of light, yes. This is not going to receive any light because this light is in the way. Third rule of light is any object that is hit by light becomes a light source itself. So that would kind of lighten up over there, and your circle would get. Your circle would end up getting a little bit of light because of the bounce light from this plane. So if I show, where is this at? Right here. Okay. So essentially the light rays travel down here, and they kind of bounce off the ground, bounce off the plane here, and hit the bottom of this light. And the light will hit here and will bounce off and hit the ground too. And it kind of will do that over and over again until the light source completely diminishes, until until it's barely noticeable. But for the purpose of doing a painting, you don't need to really worry about all of that. Just the light will bounce here and light will bounce back over here. All right. So yeah. Okay. So top of that, so that's your basic laws of light for how a light will react in an environment. It's a fairly simple setup. Top of that, the difference between matte and glossy surfaces is since we talked about the way light. Let's turn this opacity up. The way light will react on, say, a landscape like this, okay, and you have the sun heading this direction maybe, and light will bounce off these surfaces. So here, the corners will become really bright here, so receive some light here, but it's a little farther in distance, so it won't be as bright. This will not receive much light here. Light will bounce off when it hits these surfaces, right? So the difference between matte and glossy surfaces, highlights on glossy surfaces are pretty much just reflections of the light source. So if your light source is a bright white source, you're going to have like a grayscale, like whitish highlight. If your light source is like an indoor setting and you have like a yellow light source, your highlight's going to be yellow. So even if your object is like a purple sphere or something like that or whatever, and if their highlight is like yellow, really bright yellow, and if your light source is yellow, the highlight's going to be yellow because that's your light source. If your light source is like a square, if it's like a strips of light or something over here, you're going to see strips of light on your circle. Essentially, the difference between a glossy surface like that and matte surface is when light hits these areas and bounce off, they kind of scatter. So matte surfaces are actually not flat. They're not, they're like really bumpy. The particles on them, the molecules are like really bumpy. So basically what happens is light hits them and they bounce off in different directions, like how they bounce off in different directions here, and the light would scatter. So that's why when you're like painting cloth, for example, because of the fabric and how it's woven together and stuff, that's why you don't get highlights in cloth, because of the way it's put together. What am I covering after that? After gloss?
So yeah, basically the texture in like a matted objects really just like sort of captures the light.
Yeah, and
more
spread them
so
around,
than like
right?
something really smooth, like a metal, for example.
We're doing here.
So we're doing basic lighting. We did bounce lighting.
So let's.
And so since we kind of like covered a little bit of the basics and how the basic like technical physics of like lighting sort of works, we're also going to go over how to approach lighting in more complex objects.
So yeah, if your object is red here, even though you're getting main white light source, the light's going to bounce off, and that's why this looks unnatural right now, is because your bounce light should be reddish. Just take some of this red over here and here. And your light source would kind of have that reddish glow around it. Picks up light like that.
You'll see this a lot in like environments and everything. Colors sort of like affect each other, bounce off of one another. Like we'll see like blue in the sky on like some of the ground
this is
and so on.
Using some pretty simple scenes here. Do you wanna pull up my painting? Should I pull up my painting?
Yeah, go ahead. We could pull a couple examples of this.
Here, let's look it up. So this is a pretty simple scene with simple spheres on it. So it's fairly simple there. But when you have environment lighting and your environment is different colored lights and all your objects are different colored scenes and stuff like that, this seems really complicated. But here, here we go. I have it's painting. Okay.
Wow, look at that walrus man.
So it's painting essentially. It definitely it looks a lot more complex than a simple scene. Like, where did I put that painting at? Here we go. Okay. So it looks a lot more complex and stuff than our simple setup here, but essentially it's the same thing. For this painting, it's essentially one spotlight on a character. And the objects here, you can easily break them down into basic shapes. For example, the arm here is, arm here is just a cylinder. That's all it is. Or here, let's do it like this. And then the leg here is also a cylinder. And so that's really all I'm worrying about as I'm painting the scene, is lighting. All I'm worrying about is lighting basic cylinders and spheres. There's another cylinder for the arm here. And essentially that's really all I'm worrying about, is the highlights and how these objects are here. The collar is just a cylinder. It's just a cylinder around his neck. The hand is just a cube. And once you can break down what you're drawing into basic shapes, you can light anything. You're just lighting spheres, cylinders, and cubes. What else? Oh, color choices inside scenes. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times here at CIA, what we end up doing foundation year, so we teach a lot of drawing and stuff, and that's great, but it's not really too much painting that's taught. So if you end up going into like a really, digital heavy class or something like that, and you jump right into painting without, too much color theory and everything, which actually was the same for me. It's like all of a sudden, drawing in grayscale is such a huge topic. Color is just as huge. So now you throw 50% of something that into your drawing. It's really difficult to work with. So it's important to line up what you're doing with color to your values. So for example, you never want to have 50% gray, 50%. You don't ever want to have 50% dark colors, 50% light colors in your scene. You want to make sure there's good contrast. So I can bring up this example here that I have. This I didn't paint this. That'd be amazing if I did. But if you notice here, let's convert this to grayscale. So this painting here is really nice. Let's look at it first as a grayscale painting. Something that I always do is, if you want to check your composition, it's a good idea to check it in grayscale first before, or keep toggling between grayscale and color. What I never do, don't just turn saturation down like this. This isn't actually how your image is going to look like in grayscale. I can show you why. Oh, 0. Yeah. Okay. So what you go here and proof setup. and change your working from CMYK to custom, and then change this to 20%, dot gain 20%. And that's how it actually looks like if you're painting it in grayscale and stuff. That's how it'll actually look like. So if I do, for example, I have the hue saturation on. If I turn saturation down, if you notice I turn the saturation, with the effect here, if I actually toggle this, I'll change up my painting even though it's grayscale. And you notice what happens to the horizon in the background? Actually, yes. It's Control Y to toggle the actual grayscale off. You notice the background, the horizon on it is like completely vanished, and this is because it's not the right grayscale. So don't do that. Turn it to 20% dot gain, and now you can see the actual grayscale on it. But if you look at this grayscale, for example, it's a mostly light painting, and the way the composition is set up, it's mostly white, and there's dark colors around the center here, where the focal point would be, right? Around here is where there's the most action of value. When you're using color, you want to make sure that you line up your color in the same way. If you turn on color now, you'll notice that in terms of value, it's also around here. So you never want to, like spread around color over here and like color contrast. You never want to like put it around the sides of your painting or something like that. You always want to line up where your focal point is, and line up both color and value. So if you go back to the painting that I did, here, this painting, I did something pretty similar. Which I didn't realize how close the composition was to that other painting actually. Of you have big contrast here with the line, and then you have the way his arms are in the circle here. This is the main composition. If you return to grayscale, that's where the most contrast is with the value, and the most value and the most contrast here with the color also. So you don't want to, like in this painting or something, for example, I'm not going to go and paint like gold or something like that where his pants are or something like that, or add tons of ornaments and stuff. This concept sounds cool and everything, but for the purposes of the painting, it's not going to work. I want to keep all the focus here. So if I do like this, take a random brush and do watercolor brush. Okay. So if I do grayscale and change this to the opposite color of the wheel, to like a reddish color, let's see, do something darker. So if you're doing grayscale, for example, if I paint over here, you're not going to notice anything too much, and it's going to be fine. It's going to look fine or whatever. Turn grayscale back off. It's a huge color contrast, and your eyes are going to go right there. And even though value-wise your focal point is around over here, if you use the wrong color and the wrong setting and stuff, your eyes are going to focus over here, and that's not what you want. So just keep that in mind. Of value contrast should be the same as your color contrast to get like maximum efficiency out of your composition. Yeah.
Yeah, and like a good tool, especially when thinking of like saturation of colors, especially, is this neat little thing called the warp effect. So if you have like yeah, sure. I'll paint over his drawing a little here, so that'll be fun. Oh man, it's left-handed. Okay, yes, I got this. So if your main area here is, wow, what layer is this on?
I put a ton of layers and didn't delete them.
Oh my gosh. That's fine. So I'm gonna try and wing it here. Boop. But if you have like a really saturated area or like a more saturated color, you really want your eye to kind of like stay where that is. You always want a center pointer, as we talked about. You want your values and everything to kind of match the composition. But the use of gray is a really kind of like sophisticated way of going from color to color, especially when they like really contrast. So a lot of the times, if you just kind of lower the saturation here, and I mean there's like a lot of grays already in the painting, but let's say we go from like that nice red sort of magenta color over to a blue, and you have that gray in between. Let's say, what am I pressing here? we'll just zoom in a little. So we have like one extreme to another, and we have this gray. Because that saturation is so low, it really helps like lead your eye, or like
If you don't want that powerful color contrast between the way like two opposite colors or two contrasting colors are interacting with each other, then lowering the value can help merge the two together. So.
Perfect. Yeah, that's pretty much. So a lot of time it really just helps sort of lead your eye and move the color around and sort of scatter it. And it's just like a really nice transitional point overall, and wow. That's a really big eraser. Yeah, okay. Right? I know, I got that flare. But that's a really helpful tool, especially when thinking about how colors sort of react to each other and helping them like transition without them clashing too much or getting a little too messy and distracting from like certain points in your painting. Mm-hmm. But you can delete that if you want.
Okay, so I think simple rules of light to keep in mind is really all you need, and the difference between matte and glossy. It's all you need for the most part for being able to pick out material and decipher how the material will react in any environment you want, any light you want, and knowing that the color of the highlights is going to be the color of the light that's shining on it. Top of that. So if you guys have any questions of like really specific materials or anything else that you want, but I think for the most part, that's really what you need. You can pick out the light where it's at. It's also bounce lighting, like on his collar over here. Because the collar is red, the light's gonna hit off of it and bounce onto his neck over there, and it helps spread the you turn the opacity really low. It helps spread the color around the painting when you do that. I think a lot of times it's kind of difficult, or like I don't know, it's kind of daunting when you have to worry about like composition, you have to worry about color, value, all this stuff, and then when you're painting from a reference, you can look what's in front of you and start building out your painting from there. When you have nothing to build off of, or you have references that you have to somehow stitch together in a new environment, color is so relative. So as soon as if you want to paint a reference of like a walrus on a guy's head, you can find a walrus of reference image of your walrus and a reference image of your person, reference image of your scene. But when you mix that together, that's going to be entirely different from either of those images, that you can't just rely off of what you know from that photo. So blocking in a painting, generally what I would do is, I don't think I have steps here, but let's see if I can scale this down and move it. I generally start with line work, though I know some people who don't. Just kind of move this out. I know people who don't start with line work, but I have I come from a very line art background, or with just using like pencil and pen. I haven't really I never really had done a lot of painting before, so kind of stuck to that. But what I always do when I'm starting like an entirely new scene is let's do a little like thumbnail maybe. This scene here. I'm starting a new composition. Do whatever sketch you want in that scene, and then I just go in and block in flat colors first. So I use the same technique of, basically paint your flat objects first without really worrying about how how light's gonna hit on that scene and stuff. Actually, you know what? Let's not do this. We can just add an object or add something to this scene. Okay. After that, before I would put in the lights, I always put in the shadows first. Basic light setup is basic scenes, or like whenever you look at film and stuff like that, how they light up their scenes is they have a 3-point light system. Basically what that is you have the main light, which in this case is a spotlight, coming in this direction on your figure, and then you have the key light, which is, this is your key light. It's the main light, and then you have the fill light, and fill light is basically the light that uses to fill in the shadows, so you don't have really, really dark extreme shadows. If you want, that's what you want to go for, but generally in film, unless if it's like a noir film or something, they would have fill light to help fill in the shadows. And so that's why, you have a lot of like blue shadows, blue lighting here for the shadows, is because there's a blue fill light. So, a lot of times what you'd have is you have like a warm main light and then a cool fill light. So you might have like orange light, slightly warm light or something like that, and you have a slightly cold fill light, or the other way around if you want, and that creates nice contrast in the form. And then the third light is just a rim light. I don't really have a rim light in this painting, but so this is just like a 2-point light system. So normally what I do before I do anything in this painting is you do block in the colors first, and then block in the shadows afterwards. So I can turn this on to multiply layer. So if I want to add like a streak of shadow on his face or something like that, you can just paint in this light. I'll turn my layer to multiply on the shadow layer and turn opacity to something fairly low. And then you can just paint, like light in his arm or something. And here, let's do something more saturated. More saturated. Do light across his face or something. And you can just paint lights across, however you want in your scene. So if you want to have like, blind or something like that, you can just paint the light on your form. This is where it's, it's important to understand the form of what you're drawing. And then when you have this on multiply, you can like go ahead and change up whatever you want of the drawing underneath. If you want to give him like, I don't know, eyeliner and tattoos or something. If you want to change up the color of his face, the shadow of it will stay the same actually under this drawing. Let's see. Yeah. So whatever I'm painting underneath on this walrus here, the shadow on top will actually stay the same. Where did I put that one? Here, actually, I'm not painting under it. Here. Okay, there. So I can paint under him whatever I want. If I decide later on to change up the color of the walrus, for example, because of the way I painted the light on the multiply layer, the light's going to stay or the shadows on him, the main color is going to stay the same. You can also do the opposite if you want with painting light, is instead of multiply layer, you can also put it on overlay. And let's put a warmer color or something. It's kind of a light blue here. So yeah, so if you want to do the same thing with the shadows, I don't really normally do this. I just paint it in normal layer, but you can also do the same with the highlights. And then whatever underneath this highlight will also stay the same. So if you want to have stronger highlights on his eyebrow over here, just paint that in, paint the shadows in. And anything that goes underneath that will stay the same. So if you decide like randomly you want to paint like spots or stripes on your character, you can go and do that and your highlights will stay the same.
That's the nice thing about like a lot of multiply and like overlay layers when you use them, is the fact that it does like keep the information like from the layers below as far as sort of the value.
Yeah. So I make these stronger highlights. Generally, your shadows are a lot softer. Your highlights, the light in your scene, the highlights are a lot stronger. So you can go in afterwards and really paint strong highlights on your scene. It's just not actually the same as the scene. Maybe I want to change it up. But yeah, so if I want to paint like really shiny material on his arm, there it is. And then I can paint the color underneath it. Change this and make it more purple. And the highlights will stay the same under it, or they'll be relative to your scene. Yeah, so that's how I generally go out of painting. Afterwards, after all these layers, I would keep the character separate from the background, so I can add things in between or edit the background or whatever. But other than that, I would kind of merge all the layers on the character and all the layers on the background, because I think it's just too much to handle to keep flipping through all those layers when you're painting. But that's generally how I start up, and if I'm not confident on how I would paint the light or something like that on his face, or I'm still painting the forms on his face like that, and that's how I do that. Also, do you want to go through here?
Do you want to talk a little bit about like how you sort of like choose color,
Yeah.
especially for your paintings?
Okay, yeah. So something for choosing color for a painting, whenever you use, like, for example, whenever you're painting in grayscale, you never want to use full white and full black on your painting at the same time. You almost never want to use full white in your painting. You never want to use full black. There's some exceptions if you're doing like a cover illustration or something like that. Then if you're doing an illustration for a book or something like that, then you paint on white. But generally, you never want to paint on white. You never want to play with black. But in general, you never want to have the full range because there's just too much contrast. And light in a scene is never going to react that way. You're never going to have that extreme contrast like that. So the same thing is with color. You don't want to paint, the full rainbow of bright hues on your painting. It's just never going to feel like it's in the same universe. You want to tie it together. So my technique for keeping this in gamut is, let's see if I can pull up that folder again. Let's go here. Okay. Is I use the Unity color wheel. And essentially what that is you pick whatever color palette you want your painting to be. You go and select. You go ahead. So for example, in this painting, the most saturated colors of the main color palette is you have yellow here. And so it's you have sort of a mid-saturation yellow here. And we got fairly saturated blues. Let's go blue over here, bluish yellow, or bluish purple. And then you got reds, fairly saturated reds. I would generally pick about 3 or 4 colors. You'd never, maybe sometimes 5 is fine, but you never want to like pick a billion different colors. Just pick a few. Generally, you want to keep it like 3 or 4. And then after that, make a triangle between your points. And everything between that is your color range. And I'm never going to go outside of this. I'm never going to pick a bright magenta for the painting. If I do that, it's just not going to feel in the same universe. I can pick something, within that range, and it'll fit fine. You can find a way to fit it in. That's not too far out. It can fit in the painting. But I would never go outside of here. Green just doesn't fit in the world. It won't feel right, So that's a good way to keep yourself in color gamut, to make sure your painting looks like it's all in the same universe. And yeah, so you can also analyze other paintings too and see what they do. And that's a nice way to break down other people's paintings and see where they're keeping. Oh, here's a painting by Sparth. He's concept artist I think he's like the art director or the lead art director at Halo right now, at Bungie. But so his painting, for example, let's drag this to the top. Or it's just pick this top layer. Okay. So his work, for example, you can break down his painting and decide and see he has really saturated reds here. Really saturated. He has pretty saturated blues. And then some sort of green yellows, fairly saturated. But if you noticed, he's never going to actually go outside of this range. You can pick, there's some sort of oranges over here and here, and you're going to find that orange, it's within this gamut range. You're not going to find bright yellows in his painting. You're not going to find bright magentas, and you're not going to find really bright saturated greens or that saturated, or that far out of the gamut. So he generally keeps this gamut range here. And you're going to find that in most paintings too. You can analyze the painting and see how they keep their stuff within range. So that's my technique for staying within gamut and making sure all your stuff looks like it's in the same universe. So yeah.
Yeah, and that pretty much, for the most part, wraps up our lecture on basics of lighting and color. Just a couple tips and things to sort of remember about color. Color is a very subjective thing. You use color for setting moods. You use it for just kind of getting a very specific feel or telling a story in a very specific way. Color is a very abstract concept and it moves. So just go out there and play around with it. Try doing some speed paintings and studying.
If there's any questions about specific things that you want to talk about, specific materials or specific ways of painting things, I think in general, just knowing how light works and those really simple laws will help you be able to look at any material and decipher how the material bounces off of it and why the light looks the way it is. And you can recreate materials from your own imagination. Here, you can find index of refraction. See if I can just drag this here.
Nice.
Here. This image is probably going to be tiny.
And this especially pertains to if you're going to go into like painting water, for example, or like things underwater.
I wonder if I can get a bigger version of this image. Probably not. Just stick with that. Okay. So, yeah, generally with water here, the way water works is there's a effect called the Fresnel effect, and basically what that means is the more you look onto something straight on, the more you'll see a reflection of yourself, or the more you'll be able to see through it in terms of water, and the more the plane, the more what you're looking at is at an angle, the more you'll see a reflection. So that's why, if you're in water or something like that, you look down, you can see through the water. You look at an angle towards the horizon, and it's just a reflection, and that's a Fresnel effect. But you also see.
What's Fresnel?
Fresnel?
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah, but what is it? Like, if someone doesn't know what Fresnel is, explain.
It's when you look at something at an angle. The more you look at something at an angle, the more you'll see the reflection. The more reflective it is. So, and that's water is like a really big example, but you'll be able to look at it like, that's my example, but you may be able to find objects where the more you at an angle you'll look at it, the more you'll notice it's reflective. That's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and that's something you could definitely see in like even the speed paint here with sort of like the reflection of the trees and the colors and everything off of the water, since you're seeing it especially at an angle in comparison to something like where you would see like water overhead, especially when it's like really clear.
So this image I grabbed is the index of refraction. That's also what you see in water. So the idea is that if you have a object here, what do I do? Oh. So the idea is certain objects, default index of refraction is 1, and most objects it's 1. It'll never go under 1. But the idea is that let's do a bigger object. When light passes through an object, it's gonna instead of bouncing off, bouncing off this way, it's gonna, or some light will bounce off. The other light will actually go through, and it'll sort of bend as it's going through this object, and when it exits the object, it'll go straight again. So light will actually bend through as it's going through this object. And that's the same as water. So for example, in this image on the top here, when you look through the water, your eyes, the light's gonna go and bend through here. And then when it's going to exit the water, it's going to go straight again and be parallel to this. So what that means is, when you have a fish here, the light will go through here and reach into your eyes, but since your eyes are facing this way, you're going to perceive the fish here. But really the fish is down here. So that's just something to keep in mind. When you look through a glass cup or something like that, the straw is all bent weird and stuff like that. But that's, when you're painting this from imagination, that's something you have to calculate. So it's, it's good to you have to visually track the particle, the light rays and stuff, and make that up. But yeah, so I think I might have an image here showing here. Oh, yeah. So here's something really quick, just to show. The way light bounces through an object. The light will actually literally bend as it's going through the water. But yeah, I think that's it. So is there any questions or other than that? Or?
So you said that generally fabric is not reflective.
Yeah.
Right? What about in the walrus picture right there?
Yeah.
Some reflections and some highlights on the coat and on the pants.
So there's generally no specularity in the material. Not that there's no highlights. There is no really strong highlights on him actually. There's not really any strong highlights on him. There are the lightest spots in the material, but there's no actual strong highlights reflective. There's no reflections of the light source, in the material. Yeah. And that's generally because of the way the fabric is woven together and stuff, and it's not a flat surface, the light will bounce around on there, and it'll spread out on the material.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah. If there's anything that I like didn't clarify or didn't explain clearly, or there's anything specific that you have, any questions or anything?
Just add on to that a little. It really depends on how like the fabric kind of like forms to an object, as well as the type of fabric that happens a lot. Like a silk might be a little more transparent or have a lot more like reflectivity off of it in comparison to say like a cotton fabric as well. Yeah.
So does that make sense? So really, if you're painting something like this, it's just break it up into simple shapes, then you can light it really easily. So, yeah.
Hopefully this gave a good general explanation of sort of like how color and lighting works. If there's any other questions or comments or concerns, please feel free to ask.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking us.